Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to discuss the most important JPA interview questions and answers. Let's begin. The first question is, what is JPA? JPA stands for Java Persistence API. It is not a framework, it is only a specification. A specification means it defines rules, guidelines, and interfaces for handling data persistence in Java applications. JPA does not execute any SQL and it does not talk to the database directly. Instead, it provides a standard API so that different ORM frameworks can follow the same structure. Hibernate, EclipseLink, and OpenJPA are examples of frameworks that implement JPA. You write code using JPA annotations and interfaces, and underneath, Hibernate or another provider performs all the database operations. The goal of JPA is to keep your application independent of any specific persistence provider and to reduce the amount of boilerplate code developers had to write earlier using plain JDBC. Next, what is ORM? ORM stands for object-relational mapping. It is the process of mapping Java objects to relational database tables. ORM solves the mismatch between the object-oriented world of Java and the relational world of databases. Java objects have fields, relationships, and inheritance. Databases have rows, columns, and foreign keys. ORM sits in the middle and converts Java objects into SQL queries and database rows. It also converts result sets back into Java objects. This approach makes development simpler because you do not need to manually create connections, prepare statements, execute SQL, or map results. ORM frameworks handle all these tasks. JPA defines the ORM rules, and providers like Hibernate implement those rules. Now let's answer an important question. What are the advantages of JPA? The most important advantage is that you do not need to write repetitive JDBC code. You work with Java objects, and the provider generates SQL for you. JPA supports caching, transactions, relationship mapping, and lazy loading out of the box. It reduces errors because you avoid manual SQL string building. It also improves maintainability because your domain model stays in Java while the framework handles the database layer. And because JPQL is database independent, you can switch between MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, or any other database without rewriting queries. Now let's talk about one of the most asked questions. What is the difference between JPA and Hibernate? JPA is the specification, Hibernate is the implementation. When you use JPA, you write code using standard annotations like entity, id, generated value, one-to-many, and many-to-one. Hibernate is the engine that executes SQL based on these annotations. Hibernate provides many advanced features that go beyond the JPA standard, such as better caching, custom lazy loading options, batch fetching, and automatic dirty checking. Think of it like this. JPA defines the rules of a game. Hibernate is the player who follows those rules and also adds extra abilities. Next, what is a JPA entity class? A JPA entity is a simple Java class that represents a table in the database. Each object of the entity class represents one row. You annotate the class with entity to tell the provider that this class needs to be persisted. Every entity must have a primary key annotated with id. Entities must have a no-argument constructor because the provider creates them dynamically. They should not be final, and fields should not be final because Hibernate may create proxies and subclasses internally. Entities should also have getter and setter methods to allow the provider to access fields easily. Now, what are the rules to create entity classes? You must annotate the class with entity. You must mark one field as the primary key using id. You must add a default constructor. You should not make the class final. You should not make fields final. You should use Java-friendly data types such as primitives, wrappers, dates, local datetime, enums, and embeddable classes. Entities should be clean and represent only the data of your domain model. Next, what is JPQL? JPQL stands for Java Persistence Query Language. It is similar to SQL, but it works on entities instead of tables. In JPQL, you write queries using class names and field names instead of table names and column names. This makes your code portable across databases. The provider converts your JPQL query into database-specific SQL. JPQL supports joins, grouping, sorting, functions, and even bulk operations. Because it is object-oriented, it integrates naturally with your domain model. Now let's understand the JPA architecture. The core component is the entity manager. It handles all operations like saving, updating, deleting, and fetching entities. The entity manager is created by the entity manager factory. The factory is a heavy object meant to be created once and reused. The entity manager interacts with the persistence context, which acts like a first-level cache. The persistence context tracks all managed entities inside a transaction. And finally, the provider like Hibernate generates SQL, interacts with the JDBC layer, and updates the database. What is an entity manager? It is the interface provided by JPA to perform CRUD operations. It manages entity lifecycle, tracks changes, creates queries, and synchronizes objects with the database. Entity manager is not thread safe. Every request or transaction should get its own instance. In Spring Boot, you usually get an entity manager automatically through the JPA repository layer. Let's talk about the steps to persist an entity. You start by creating or obtaining an entity manager, then you begin a transaction, then you call the persist method to make the entity managed. When you commit the transaction, the provider generates and executes the SQL insert statement. This process ensures correct transaction boundaries and data consistency. Next question. What data types can you use in an entity? You can use primitives, wrapper classes, strings, enums, dates, local date time, big decimal, and embeddable classes. Collections like list or set are allowed for relationships. The provider converts these types to appropriate SQL types based on the database. What is an embeddable class? It is a class whose fields are stored as part of an entity table instead of having its own table. For example, an address class with street, city, and postal code. You annotate the class with embeddable and use embedded inside an entity. This helps you create reusable components without creating additional tables. What are the different types of entity mapping? JPA supports 4 types of entity relationships. One-to-one is when one entity is related to exactly one other entity. One-to-many is when one entity has multiple related entities. Many-to-one is the reverse of one-to-many. Many-to-many is used when multiple records in one table relate to multiple records in another table. These mappings represent real-world domain relationships and allow JPA to manage foreign keys, join tables, and cascading behavior. What are JPA cascade types? Cascading controls how operations on one entity affect related entities. Persist saves the child automatically. Remove deletes the child automatically. Merge updates the child. Refresh reloads the child. Detach removes both from the persistence context. Cascade all applies all operations. Cascading ensures that your data remains consistent across related entities. What are the features of JPQL? JPQL supports object-oriented queries, joins, grouping, ordering, functions, subqueries, and bulk operations. It is database independent and works directly with your domain model. It improves readability and maintainability because queries no longer depend on table names. What are JPA primary key generation strategies? Hibernate and JPA support several ways to generate primary keys. The identity strategy lets the database generate the key using auto-increment columns. The sequence strategy uses database sequences and is common in Oracle and PostgreSQL. The table strategy uses a dedicated table to generate unique keys. Auto lets Hibernate Choose the best strategy based on the database dialect. These strategies make key generation consistent and database independent. Next, explain JPA inheritance strategies. JPA supports single table where all subclasses share one table. It is fast but may contain many null values. Second is joint strategy, where each subclass has its own table and they are linked by primary key. It is normalized but requires joins. The third is table per class, where each subclass has its own full table. It avoids joins but has redundant columns. Each strategy suits different use cases depending on performance and design needs. So these are the frequently asked interview questions on JPA. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.